Okay, so let's discuss Dream Children or Reverie by Charles Lamb. In the previous class, we discussed about the pre-reading activity of Charles Lamb and what is daydreaming all about. So about Charles Lamb, what three aspects you're supposed to understand is, one is his literature was predominantly for children. Secondly, he succumbed to mental illness, okay, frequently, okay, along with his sister, okay. And the third aspect is his famous work. One of his famous work is Essays to Ilya. Okay, about daydreaming, we realize the difference between how it differs depending on the age. Okay, you did a pre-reading activity related to what were your daydreams when you were in childhood, and what about your daydreams now? Okay, so before dealing with this text, I will just mention in just how it is. If you look into this layout as well, you find very few full stops, because since it is in the form of a dream, you find it there are very lengthy sentences. See here what happens, the narrator is sitting on his armchair. You will get to know about this only at the end of the short story. Okay, the narrator is sitting on his armchair and he is resting. He falls asleep. When he has fallen asleep, he comes across this dream. In the dream, what is that he finds is he is talking to two children, two small kids, and these two small kids are asking about his parents, his grandparents, about his personal life. Okay, while talking about his grandma, he says his grandma was very active, was popular, and his grandma had this kind of hallucination where, since she lived in a big mansion, she had this hallucination while she was sleeping that two small kids were running up and down the stairs, but she never found them. And simultaneously, he also has a similar kind of dream. He is talking to these two people, two small kids. Later, he realizes that in the initial stages of his dream, he was talking to these two small kids, right? Later, he gets to know these two small kids do not exist at all. And he too has this kind of hallucination or daydream. Okay, so let's discuss this in detail. Dream Children or Reverie by Charles Lamb. Children love to listen to stories about their elders when they were children, to stretch their imagination to the conception of a traditionary great uncle or grandam whom they never saw. So he's generally talking about the inquisitiveness of children. He says, children, any children for that matter, generally intends to know about their parents, grandparents. Similarly, these children also were like that. It was in this spirit that my little ones crept about me the other evening to hear about their great-grandmother Field. You should make a note of the characters that come across here, because since there are no pauses, full stops, it's confusing. So write down great-grandmother Field. So he is having this in his dream, but we do not get to know in the initial part of the story. Only in the later part of the story we get to know about it. Generally, he says children are very inquisitive to know about the parents and grandparents. Similarly, these two kids also wanted to know about whom? Great-grandmother Field. For him, Field is a grandmother. For these children, Field is great-grandmother, who lived in a great house in Norfolk, 100 times bigger than that in which they and Papa lived, which they had been the scene. So at least it was generally believed in that part of the country of the tragic incidents which they had lately become familiar with from the ballad of the children in the wood. So usually whenever we talk about our past, we intend to exaggerate. Similarly, he is also exaggerating, saying that the house in which his grandma lived is 10 times bigger than the present house in which he is living. And where do these children have this perception of this big house? Only in some stories that they have listened to. Stories about tragic incidents that they have listened to. Certain it is that the whole story of the children and the cruel uncle was to be seen fairly carved out in wood upon the chimney piece of the great hall. The whole story down to Robin Redbreast, till a foolish rich person pulled it down to set up a marble one of modern invention in its stead, with no story upon it. So the big building in which his grandma lived was owned by a rich person, and later he renovated it. Here, Alice put one of her dear mother's looks. Alice is one girl, small girl, okay, whom he thinks he is interacting with. So while he was talking about this, Alice wore her mother's dress, just like any girl wears it, likes to wear it. Too tender to be called upbraiding. Then I went on to say how religious and how good their great grandmother Field was, how beloved and respected by everybody, though she was not indeed the mistress of this great house, but had only the charge of it. And yet, in some respects, she might be said to be the mistress of it too. Then he continues exaggerating or praising his grandmother Field. He says to what extent she was responsible, to what extent she was active, and how she discharged her duties as the mistress of this place. Committed to her by the owner, who preferred living in a newer and more fashionable mansion which he had purchased somewhere in the adjoining country. So the bigger mansion in which his grandmother lived did not belong to her. It was rented out, and the owner lived somewhere else. But she lived in it in a manner as if it had been her own, and kept up the dignity of the great house in a sort while she lived, which afterwards came to decay and was nearly pulled down, and all its old ornaments stripped and carried away to the owner's other's house, where they were set up and looked as awkward as if someone were to carry away the old tombs they had seen lately at the abbey and stick them up in Lady C's tawdry gilt drawing room. So again he continues. Okay. Later, after this grandmother's death, that particular big house was demolished, and whichever things were useful, those things were taken away by the owner of the house, and he used it in his another home. Okay, he is comparing this activity of using the essential things from the older house to the newer house to taking away some pieces of tomb and placing it in the hall. Tomb means dead bodies, place where the dead bodies are buried. Here John smiled as much as to say, so John is another character. Alice is small girl, John is small boy, whom he thinks he's interacting with. You should make a note in your textbooks. Here John smiled as much as to say that would be foolish indeed. And then I told how when she came to die, her funeral was attended by a concourse of all the poor and some of the gentry too of the neighborhood for many miles round to show their respect for her memory. Again, he continues saying that during the death of his grandmother, people across the economic strata visited her for the last rites, because she had been such a good and religious woman, so good indeed that she knew all the psaltery by heart and a great part of the testament besides. So she was deeply religious, and she was good to such an extent. It is the perception. Okay, if anybody is religious, if they know the information related to scriptures, they are considered as noble beings. Okay, traditional Victorian society, and it can be compared to traditional Indian society as well. Okay, she was revered, respected because she knew most of the scriptures by heart related to Christianity. Here, little Alice spread her hands. Then I told what a tall, upright, graceful person their great grandmother Field once was, and how in her youth she was esteemed the best dancer. Again, he continues talking about his grandmother Field. Now he is talking about the youth, how she was a wonderful dancer during her youth. Here, Alice's little right foot played an involuntary movement till upon my looking grave it desisted, the best dancer I was saying in the country, till a cruel disease called a cancer came. So he says the moment the narrator tells that his grandmother Field was a great dancer, Alice, being a girl, start tapping her feet. Means even she is motivated to dance. He says she was so full of life, okay, and she was one of the best dancers in the country until cancer killed her. This is called cancer came and bore her down with pain, but it could never bend her good spirits and make them stoop, but they were still upright because she was so good and religious. So he says, though her health deteriorated because of cancer, it could not kill her spirit because she was religious to such an extent. Then I told how she was used to sleep by herself in a lone chamber of a great lone house, and how she believed that an apparition of two infants was to be apparition of two infants. This is very much important. His grandmother also had this apparition or hallucination about the two infants climbing up and down the staircase in that big house. He also has the same apparition, because whatever story is narrating now is actually happening in his dreams. We'll get to know at the later part of the story. Okay, these innocents, a great staircase near where she slept, but she said, those innocents would do her no harm. And how frightened I used to be though in those days I had my maid to sleep with me because I was never half so good or religious as she. So now he is narrating his own personal experience of his stay in that huge mansion to these small kids. Okay, while he was sleeping along with while he was staying with his grandmother in that house. Okay, his grandmother used to have this hallucination or apparition that two small kids are running up and down the staircase, and she used to say, "These two small kids will not do anything to me." But this narrator, being a small boy, was afraid, and he insisted his domestic help to sleep along with him because he was not religious. Usually, we tend to believe that people who are close to God, for them, devils or any evil spirits can't harm. Here, John expanded all his eyebrows and tried to look courageous. Then I told how good she was to all her grandchildren, having us to the great house in the holidays, where I, in particular, used to spend many hours by myself in gazing upon the old bust of the 12 Caesars that had been emperors of Rome, till the old marble heads would seem to live again, or I to be turned into marble with them. How I never could be tired with roaming about the huge mansion. So again, he kept on saying, during my stay with my grandmother, I spent most of my time in that house admiring the busts, the images of the emperors, okay, and how even he became one of them. How I never could be tired of roaming about the huge mansion with its vast empty rooms, with their worn-out hangings, fluttering tapestry, and carved oaken panels, with the gilding almost rubbed out, sometimes in the spacious old-fashioned gardens, which had almost to myself, unless when now and then a solitary gardening man would cross me. So whenever he used to go to his grandma's house, he used to admire the big house and other historical artifacts that were kept. Okay, and apart from that, the paintings and other images. And then other favorite place of his was the garden. Okay, he used to play himself in the garden, except whenever he was interrupted by the gardener. And how the nectarines and peaches hung upon the walls without my ever offering to pluck them, because they were forbidden fruit, unless now and then, and because I had more pleasure in strolling about among the old melancholy looking yew trees and the firs, and picking up the red berries and the fir apples, which are good for nothing but to look at, or in lying out upon the fresh grass with all the fine garden smells around me, or basking in the orange tree, till I could almost fancy myself ripening too along with the oranges. So he says the garden was full of fruits, but it was forbidden to eat. Okay, many a times, wheat flowers or even fruits are not edible. Okay, it's just for decorative purposes. Okay, and therefore he felt most of it were forbidden either because he didn't want to eat, or the gardener prevented him from eating it. There were so many oranges lying on the floor. Okay, he too felt like ripening along with the oranges. Such was the order, such was the fragrance. Till I could almost fancy myself ripening too along with the oranges and the limes in that grateful warmth, or in watching the dance that darted to and fro in the fish pond at the bottom of the garden, with here and there a great sulky pike hanging midway down the water in silent state. So apart from the greeneries, there was an aquarium or a pond where he used to enjoy the movement of fish. As if it mocked at their impertinent friskings, I had more pleasure in these busy idle diversions than in all the sweet flavors of peaches, nectarines, oranges, and such like common baits of children. So he said he was more interested in all this sceneries. He wanted to play with the fish, enjoy himself in the garden. Here, John slyly deposited back upon the plate a bunch of grapes, which, not unobserved by Alice, he had meditated dividing with her. So here again, he's talking about the past. While he is talking about, narrating about his childhood, this is what John and Alice are doing. John and Alice are two small kids to whom he thinks that he is addressing. John slyly deposited back on the plate a bunch of grapes, which, not unobserved by Alice, he had meditated dividing with her, and both seemed willing to relinquish them for the present as irrelevant. So while he was talking about narrating the story, John puts a bunch of grapes on the plate. Both John and Alice have it. Then in somewhat a more heightened tone, I told how, though their grandmother feels love all her grandchildren, yet in an especial manner, she might be said to love their uncle John L. Though we should understand the difference, narrator is talking about his own grandmother, that is Field. This Field He is the great grandmother of John and Alice, small kids. Did you understand? And you usually, in older days, names of ancestors were kept to the new generation people. Similarly, though the name of the small boy is also John, it is actually taken from the name of his uncle, that is John L. That is what he says. Though narrator's grandmother liked all the grandchildren, she had one favorite. Who is that? John L. Yet in a special manner, she might be said to love their uncle, John L., because he was so handsome and a spirited youth and a king to the rest of us. And instead of mopping about in solitary corners like some of us, he would mount the most mettlesome horse he could get, but an important no bigger than themselves, and make it carry him half over the country in the morning, and join the hunters when they were any out. And yet he loved the old great house and gardens too, but had too much spirit to be always spent up with their boundaries. So the uncle of these two kids, that is John L., who also happens to be the brother of the narrator, okay, he was the favorite of narrator's grandmother. Why? He was charming, he was an outgoing person, and he was a hero kind of figure to all of them, because he was adventurous. While everybody were content playing in the garden, he wanted to ride the horse. Okay, he wanted to explore, and he liked to hunt. Okay, to such an extent he was adventurous. But of their great grandmother field most especially, and how he used to carry me upon his back when I was a lame-footed boy. So the narrator was a lame-footed boy, means he had hurt his foot, or there was an injury, and this person, John, helped him a lot. For he was a good bit older than me, many a mile when I could not walk, pain, and how in after life he became lame-footed too. So his uncle also became lame-footed. And I did not always, I fear, make allowances enough for him when he was impatient and in pain, nor remember sufficiently how considerate he had been to me when I was lame-footed, and how when he died, though he had not been dead, betwixt means between, betwixt is Old English, between life and death, and how I bore his death as I thought pretty well at first. So he talks about the past, how John L. helped him, whom? Helped the narrator when he was lame-footed. And later, unfortunately, John L. also became lame-footed. And when he succumbed to death, initially the narrator could not understand the intensity of the death. But later, he started missing him. He understood the intensity of his death. It kept on haunting him. And though I did not cry or take it to heart, as someone do, and as I think he would have done if I had died, yet I missed him all day long, and knew not till then how much I had loved him. I missed his kindness, and I missed his crossness, and wished him to be alive again, to be quarreling with him, for we quarreled sometimes, rather than not have him again, and was as uneasy without him as he, their poor uncle, must have been when the doctor took off his limb. Okay, here what happens, rather than not have him again, and was uneasy without him, as he, their poor uncle, must have been when the doctor took off his limb. So he's talking how John L.'s limb was cut off by the doctor because of some infection. While he was narrating the story, these two small kids started crying. Here the children fell a crying and asked if their little mourning which they had on was not for Uncle John, and they looked up and prayed me not to go on about their uncle, but to tell them some stories about their pretty dead mother. So this, the small kids are emotional. Okay, when they listen to the story that the Uncle John's limb was cut off, they started crying, and they didn't want to hear more about it. Then they insisted, the narrator telling that, okay, stop telling about Uncle John L. No, tell something about our mother. Okay, about their pretty dead mother. Then I told how for 7 long years, in hope sometimes in despair, yet persisting ever, I quoted the fair Alice W. Again, see, name of the small boy is John. Uncle name is John L. Name of the small girl is Alice. And this mother's name is Alice W. And as much as children could understand, I explained to them what coyness and difficulty and denial meant in maidens, when suddenly turning to Alice. Okay, when he was talking about the dead mother of these two small kids, okay, who could be his wife or he could be his beloved. He says, I tried a lot to convince her to love me. It was a difficult task. And he says how difficult it is to convince maidens. Maidens here refers to unmarried women. And then the moment he was talking about Alice, he looks at small girl Alice. Then what happens? He gets the image. He sees that his beloved Alice only is seeing him through the eyes of the small girl Alice. When suddenly turning to Alice, the soul of the first Alice looked out at her eyes with such a reality of representment that I became in doubt which of them stood there before me, or whose that bright air was. And while I stood gazing, both the children gradually grew fainter to my view. Okay, when he was talking about Alice, how difficult he found it to impress her, to convince her to love him, he looks at the small girl Alice. When he looks at the small girl Alice, he feels that he is looking at the dead Alice. Okay, and his vision became fainter. Okay, and then these two small kids vanished. Still receding, fainter to my view, receding and still receding till nothing at last but two mournful features were seen in the uttermost distance, which without speech strangely impressed upon me the effects of speech. Mournful features mean some two non-living things. Okay, and he felt that those two non-living things are speaking. What did they say? We are not of Alice, nor of thee, nor are we children at all. Okay, this is what he listens from two non-living things there. All this time he thought that those two non-living things are Alice and John, two small kids. Okay, later he realizes they are non-living things, but he overhears the speech. Okay, overhears the talkings. So these two small kids are saying, we are not of Alice, we are not of you. Okay, we are not children at all. And they say the children of Alice called Bartram father. Okay, the small kids of Alice addressed Bartram as their father. We are nothing less than nothing. And dreams, he says, we are nobody, we are just dreams. We are only what might have been and must wait upon the tedious shores of millions of ages before we have existence and a name. So he hears this small, that non-living thing saying, we are not children and we don't have life at all. Okay, it's just a name. I found myself quietly seated in my bachelor armchair where I had fallen asleep. Open the door, open the door. Keep it. I found myself quietly seated in my bachelor armchair where I had fallen asleep with the faithful Bridget unchanged by my side, but John L. or James Elia was gone forever. So at this moment he realizes, I found myself quietly seated in my bachelor armchair. Okay, when his dream is about to end, okay, when he hears in his dreams that these two small kids saying that we are the non-living creatures saying that we are not of you, children of Alice called Bartram father. At that moment, he wakes himself up. He gets awakened. I found myself and immediately awakening. This word informs you that he was dreaming all the time. And immediately awakening, I found myself quietly seated in my bachelor armchair where I had fallen asleep with the faithful Bridget unchanged by my side. But John L. or James Elia was gone forever. Okay, John L., whether he was thinking about his own sibling John or whatever, James Elia, they are gone forever. They are dead and gone. So glossary, conception, the forming or devising of a plan or idea. Apparition, a ghost or ghost-like image of a person. Impertinent, not showing proper respect or rude. Relinquish, voluntarily cease to keep or claim, give up. Okay, so now go through this chapter. If you have any doubts, you ask.